Hello and welcome back from wherever you're coming back from. You're probably sitting in the same chair you were before, but now we're sitting in the same chair we were as well. So I guess we never left as far as could be that we never left. You don't know. We do. There's lots of ways to do that. That'll be a different thing. We'll talk about like conspiracy theories or something sometimes and go down one of those rabbit holes. This episode, though, I want to swing back around a couple episodes back, especially if you're here on the video. If you're listening to podcasts, you may have missed it because it was bonus material basically. But one of the topics I had mentioned that we were going to cover was like realistic expectations, was how do you deal with customers and making sure that there is clarity. And this customer could be, it could even be yourself sometimes, but definitely it could be your boss. It could be an actual, like a customer. And how do you, it's like sort of bad news, difficult conversations kinds of things, but it's things like, hey, it takes a certain amount of work and effort and time and cost to build something, to do something, to accomplish something. And so it's how do you communicate that? And it is, as I refer to it, it's sort of like it is what it is that there is a level of just, there's a minimum that has to be done to do something. And so somebody may try to argue you down, but there's a point where it's like, that's not valid. I can't do that. It's like, can you do it in, you say it's going to take 10 hours. Can you do it in 9? All right, maybe. Can you do it in 8? I don't know. Can you do it in 1? No. There's stuff like that where you're like, all right, stop whittling it down. And instead, let's be realistic. So we're going to dive into the podcast and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about reality and clarity and communication. And it goes back to, I had a conversation the other day with a customer, and I think it just really brought that to light as far as these are things that if you've got a good customer, and this guy's awesome, it's, if you got a good customer, then it makes the whole thing work better, but it is a two-way street. So it's not just them being a nice customer. You've got to be clear and honest and pursue the things that you need to pursue so that you can let them know what the risks are. And as best as you, to your best of your ability, is allow them to make decisions that are well informed. That being said, it's time for us to dive into the podcast. Hello and welcome back. It is season 21. It is episode some number. I can't even remember now. Like we're just chugging along in our episodes, working our way through this season. Trust me, don't trust me because we may go further, but it's probably going to be another one of those like 30-ish episode seasons, but we'll probably end up going into just like a follow-up season that's going to be the same kind of thing because we have a lot that we want to discuss. We're getting into the mentor mastermind kind of approach. We're talking about like problems that we've seen on a given week. And guess what? We see new problems every day, every week. And these are the kinds of things because we are in the trenches just like you are. We're seeing things that are going to help you out that you probably are seeing as well. And just as part of that, I want to introduce myself because I don't always do that. This is Rob Broadhead. I am a founder here at Developreneur, also founded RB Consulting, which is my day job. I guess this is my side hustle, if that's a thing in this case. And so I am a software consultant by day. I do a lot of like IT assessments. Some people call these things like fractional CTO, CIO, but also we do like full service. We will build your entire piece of software for you, or we'll tell you how to build your software and show you like the best ways to approach that. That's me. On the other screen, if you can see this, just in the other ear hole, I guess, if this is what you're listening to, is Michael. Michael, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. My name is Michael Malash. I'm also a co-founder of Developreneur. I also am the founder of Envision QA, where my company focuses on QA assessments, where we help companies look at their software infrastructures and identify where they're lacking in QA. And we also offer other testing services like unit testing, Selenium test, A/B testing. And we also have the discussion with the customers to try and flip the QA model on its head. Don't wait till the end to do the QA. Start the QA process when you talk to the customer. So that's me, and welcome.
So I want to dive right into this little topic because it is one that I think a lot of us, particularly if we come out of a developer type role, technician type role, it's harder for us to do this because there is a level of sales and communication and those things that usually are not attributed to us that are a part of this. Now, the first thing is we have to have our ducks in a row. I think we need to really be realistic. And this is to just us that are developers, is that we need to like break as much as we can the mold, the hard and fast rule that if a developer tells you it's going to take X amount of hours, multiply it by 2 at least. And if you can even get it to multiply by 1.5 instead of 2, like just something that you can bring it down closer to reality, that will help a lot. Because the problem, I think part of the reason I've got a little, infographic somewhere about this. But one of the things that's not discussed, I think, often enough, the reason why software projects fail or are over budget is because the developers, yeah, sometimes it's because they didn't understand their requirements, they didn't really discuss it right, that kind of stuff. A lot of times, though, it's because we look at a problem, we say, I can get that done in an hour. I can crank that sucker out. I could like throw some code, spew some code, run it, build it, debug it, test it, boom, done. And it's like, it's going to take me an hour. And then you find out that it actually takes you 2 hours or 4 hours or 8 hours because we don't think about or we don't factor in things like I had a typo that was like, it was a capital C instead of a lowercase c, and it cost me an hour to find that in the code that I was generating. Or I had a configuration issue that blew stuff up. Or I chased down the rabbit hole because I thought my code was broken, but it was actually the API provider they had broken their stuff. There's just so many ways software can go wrong that we need to like buffer that in. I know we want to be aggressive. We want to say, hey, it is. We look at it and we say, hey, I can get this done in 2 hours if everything's good, if everything's going my way. Spoiler alert, nothing is going to go. It's like that never happens. In my entire life, I think I've had like blocks of hours and maybe a day where it's just like boom, 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 everything fell into place. Everything was awesome. And and that wasn't just, because I had been doing this for a long time. It's just because like I was lucking out. I needed to go buy a lottery ticket at the end of the day. There's just stuff that happens. So we need to be realistic and think about that when we are estimating things. It's like add some of that wiggle room in, because more often than not, you're going to find out that wiggle room that you thought you were adding in gets just gobbled up very, very quickly. Thoughts on that?
Oh, definitely. So it's really interesting hearing this conversation because, we live this all the time. And we had a discussion on this recently where, we were talking about doing a proposal for something. And it's like, well, here's the idea or the pseudo requirements. And being a tester, I take everything at face value. So I take the requirement and I immediately start picking it apart. I no longer quickly throw out, oh, it's going to take X, Y hours, because you're right. We never really know the full situation. The other thing is the requirement even the requirement? So there's been conversations I've had with people where it's like, well, I want this. Well, okay, what is the user story? What is the end result you're looking for? And walk it back to that requirement. And a lot of times they can't do that. And the moment that happens, you realize that, okay, so your initial requirement or your initial request for what you want, I'm now going to tack on a week for something that might be 8 hours, simply because, sure, I'll write this, but then you're going to turn around and say, okay, I want this. And then you're going to turn around, you want this. And that's the scope creep, because the requirements are defined clearly enough to actually estimate the job. The other problem is, in their mind, they have one thing that they want, and that's what they wrote down. But once they see it, that's not what they want. So they're going to immediately start scope creeping. And that's what you got to be careful of, right? I mean, we don't want to be in the situation when we say, yeah, an hour, but you've now scope creeped in 40 hours worth of work. It's not worth my time.
And that's where I think clarity and communication comes in, is that if you're going to be a hard ass about such stuff, or if you're going to be very detail oriented, then you need to be detail oriented, and you need to not just say, hey, this is this could like, and sometimes I'll start with like, this could take anywhere between 10 hours and 10 years because what you've given me, we don't have enough information. But what you can do is as you're digging into that and you're asking the questions, you're getting answers, is that you can evolve that and work it into ballparks and things like that, where you can say, okay, based on what you've said, I think this is where we're going to go. It's going to take X amount of, or X range, XY range of hours. And these are the things that are concerns, or these are the things that I don't think either I know we haven't really explored, or that I don't think we've explored enough, so that you got at least a, hey, this thing is sort of known or maybe very well known. And that's awesome. And we'll put an estimate around that. Based on that, we can make assumptions about these other things, but those other things are to be determined. And here's roughly what it's going to be. Because what's going to happen is you want to have a customer coming into this, particularly when you're starting out, when they're working on this project and deciding, is it, what's it going to cost them, or what's the value of it, and things like that, is give them an idea of what that's going to take. Now, if you've done things like this before and they're thinking this is going to be, and it could be, that's like really simple, really small, it's going to be just picking a number, like, yeah, this is going to be a $500 project potentially with what you've said. It's like, if it's that simple, great. But then warn them and say, you know what? I've done this 10 different times, and 9 times out of 10, that thing grew into a $50,000 project. Because I don't care who you are, $500 is very different from $50,000. And those are the things that kill us. And sometimes it's like, it's going to be double or triple or quadruple, but you need to be able to go into those saying, hey, this is what we're looking at. These are our assumptions, and let them know sometimes, like, if there are things that you don't know, is don't be afraid to say, hey, this thing I haven't really looked at, or here's the assumptions I'm making. Once those assumptions go out the window, then the estimates are basically void because we built them based on assumptions. And I've gotten, like, every statement of work that I put out there has some level of either questions that are yet to be answered or assumptions that are made, or a lot of times both, because those are the things I'm going to point to if things are going one way or another, and say, this is where our assumption was, and it was wrong, or it got changed, or it got added to. And these are the questions we had, and those answers cost us problems. But we should also be able to say, when they answer that question and you suddenly say, oh, that's going to blow this up, don't try to hide it or obfuscate or anything. It's just say, hey, we didn't get this answered until now. Now that you're telling me this is what I see. And I had this, like I said, this sort of was prompted by a discussion I had with the customer, where part of it was, I said, look, we're on track right now. I said, what I'm seeing and we'd already adjusted some stuff. And I'm like, okay, we're on track. What I see. However, this section that is towards the back end of the track, we haven't really started on. And I think it's going to be okay based on what I'm learning, because I think we're getting over the humps, but that could be a problem. And so it's just a little bit of a, like, hey, here's a warning that may be a bigger problem. But I think it's reasonable to leave it there. And then I actually even told him, I was like, yeah, I could buffer that out more. But I basically told him, like, it's sort of like saying, this is an aggressive estimate. Yeah, we can probably do it, but it's we have a 10% chance or a 20% chance or a 50-50 chance of making it. And then this is where we see, at least here's what are some of the things we see that could cause more, issue. I had another customer that it totally blew up his project and what his estimates were, because this is where he came to me with the project. He said, it's basically done. It's like 99% there. I just need you to drag it across the finish line. And he was basing that on what his developer told him. His developer didn't know squat, apparently, about where it was at. It was like that finishing piece was not 90%, 99% of the way there. There was a lot of work, and it was stuff, there was a lot of rework. And so this thing that was going to be 10, 20 hours blew into hundreds of hours. And that's the kind of stuff that, if we've been able to tell them that before, he would have had to like decide, okay, am I going to do this? But also we would have like the whole arrangement would have been very different. It ended up being not what we wanted. We ended up pouring a lot of stuff into that because we're like, just, we like the guy. We wanted to help him. I've already talked about it. I'm too nice sometimes. I'm a bad boy or whatever. But we wanted to help him. We love this project. We want to do that, but we ended up throwing a lot of stuff into that. And then he still ended up in a situation where he was going to have to spend because we weren't what they really needed. We weren't going to, we were going to be able to, we could have like put more into that and made it happen, but it was now going to cost us because we weren't going to charge them, but it's sort of a blessing to us because now somebody else is going to come in. They're going to charge them for that work. And they're going to find somebody that's like more of that specialist so they can hopefully get that thing done in less time than we would have. So it's like a win-win. But this is where you've got to be honest about that stuff. I think all of us are the same way. If we go in and we need to get our car repaired and they give us an estimate of $500 and we're like, I ain't got $500, but okay, I've got to pay that to get my car working. If they come back and it's a $5,000 bill, we're going to freak out. We're going to say, wait a minute. I would have sold the car. I would have like said that was it if I'd known that was what it was going to cost. And so those are the things that we need to consider when we're putting together these estimates and when we're communicating with our customers.
Yeah, so you've touched on quite a few points there. The first, so let me start with the end and kind of work my way back. So being upfront with the cost is one of the biggest things, but sometimes the requirements or what you hear from the customer wasn't clearly defined or it's too loosely defined. For example, I had someone that has an idea for an application and they're like, well, it's basically VRBO, but for this industry. Well, okay. Can you give me any more requirements on that? No, that's basically it. And they're like, well, what kind of ideas or costs or things are involved? And so I spent 30 minutes and just kind of worked up very high level, like, here are just some things to think about. And then, I threw a price tag out there that was going to be obscene because you don't have the requirements. So there's a lot of discovery that needs to be involved, a lot of hidden thing. I mean, they really have no idea what goes into the software. So I think I put it between $50,000 and $150,000 because I mean, it was going to be a mobile app, a desktop app. There's going to be e-commerce. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, that number could easily been doubled, but I was like, if you start here, this is what you're looking at. Now, if you refine that and say, okay, what do I need for a proof of concept? And you narrow that down, okay, here you now shrunk the requirements and you've now shrunk the cost because now we can clearly define what it is. So when you're talking about that one customer that came to you and said, oh yeah, this product's nearly done. This is one of those times where I would have actually said, okay, let's block out 10 hours. We'll bill you for 10 hours. Let's take, or even a couple hours, do a paid consultation to walk through the application with them, their current environment, the current state of things, get a true assessment of what's going on, and then either take the job on at a more refined estimate of what you're walking into versus kind of going in unknown. So one, basically you're saying, hey, I'll do a paid assessment. I'll do that software assessment for you, figure out where you're at. Are you being told what it is? Is it really at a state you can get it to where you need to go? And maybe even just give them peace of mind, yes or no. And here's where you're looking, here's what you need to do. And then the other one, as you're going through these requirements, or you actually define all the requirements, from a tester's perspective, I look at every ticket as what is the statement of work? What is the requirement? Based on the requirement, what do I need to do to get this? Basically, what is the acceptance criteria? What is it that I need to do to say that this unit of work is complete? What is testable? What is not in scope of this requirement? Or what is within scope of this requirement? And that also helps you kind of narrow down your budgetary hours. We talked about one proposal we were looking at doing it. I started out with about 40 to 60 hours because you gave me a very high level, like, oh, here's an idea, or here's a statement of work for something like this, I'm going to start high because I have no idea what all the nitpicky pieces are. But then as we started narrowing it down, we got down to what? About 3 days, maybe 4 days of work out of that. So that's what you have to consider as you're going through this. Now, where me and Rob differ a little bit is I come at these from a tester's perspective. I come at it from the user's perspective, not so much from the developer's perspective anymore. And that's just from years of writing tests, fighting with requirements, reverse engineering requirements because there's no documentation for the software that you're working on. And it's like, well, here, make this work. How is it supposed to work? We don't know. And then you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Okay, so what you want me to do, and you have no documentation, yeah, your budget just got blown because I now have to spend X amount of time essentially learning your application, understanding what you have, because you clearly don't. And then you're expecting me to then build on top of that. So these are a lot of the things and problems you could run into that you have to think about. And there's some forethought you can put into some of these before you even do there. Like we've talked about, do like a 30-minute free call and talk through a simple RFP, not a detailed RFP or even a software assessment or QA assessment. These are just some ways to help shrink that, the pricing that or your budget for a particular project, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned because this is one this is like, again, one of those, it's an ongoing discussion, is that you mentioned a proof of concept. And I think that's something that very often it is worth it to push a proof of concept or a minimum viable product and a lot of companies I've seen a lot of customers that are starting to realize this. And it's like, let's get something that is definable that we can actually like put our arms around. And let's get that done and figure out what that costs and what it takes and dig into that. And then we can figure out if we want to go beyond it. Now, I do see, like, this is one of the things I've seen when I've put proposals out. I don't know how many times I've had somebody say, here's what we want. Here's a request. We want this thing. And I've had to send back, I can't give you. Now I can, if it's an hourly rate, I can give them like, here's an hourly rate, but they'll say, I want a fixed bid and this is what I want. And I'll be like, it's impossible. And it's funny because I don't have that often that they come back to me. So I think a lot of them get burned. And because somebody says, I can do that for $1,000. And they're like, cool, my budget was 2,000, I win. But what happens is they lose because it doesn't get done or it gets done for $10,000 or more than that. And I will often go to them and say exactly this kind of approach. And I've had a few that I have won a project because I was just straight up with them. I said, look, I can't give you any kind of ballpark with what you've given. You've given me something that is very minimal. These are just some of the questions that need to be answered. These are some of the things that you need to consider. And then once I can get answers to those, then I can start putting together an estimate. And then we can start thinking about what this is going to take. But again, that's a lot of times what I'll do is I'll say, hey, I'm instead of bidding, $50,000 for what you think is a $50,000 project, I'm going to bid $500 and I'm going to go spend a few hours and we're going to put together a plan. We're going to put together some requirements, or I'm going to spend whatever it is, figure out what it's going to take. And I will adjust that based on, a lot of times it's based on how big their project is. If they say, hey, this is a $1 million project for $10,000, I will help you put together that plan. If it's $1,000 project, then I may say it's going to be, maybe it's only $100 or something like that. But I'll say, hey, we need the plan first. Sometimes it is. They're like, I've only got $1,000 budget. I'm like, well, you know what? Just to put the plan together is going to cost you 500 of that. And so there's no way we're going to hit your budget. So you're going to have to adjust that. And those are the kinds of things where you get out. Don't be afraid to step into those. And this is where, again, I've gotten burned a couple of times where it's like, hey, this works. This is there. It's solid, things like that. And you turn around and you're like, no, it's not. All these things you said are there, they're not there. You said there was documentation, it's not there. You said they have a build, no, they don't. Or they build it, but they can't build that anywhere but their machine. There's those kinds of things that it's worth checking that stuff out. And this is where I'm going to pause because I know we're going a little long this time. So I want to wrap this one up. and just say, what are some of your horror stories? Feel free to share those with us because we've got plenty and we will continue to talk about them. But if you guys have anything, shoot us an email at info@developerner.com. Check us out on the website. You can leave us comments. You can put comments down in the show notes. You can see stuff there, all the different places you can connect with us. But we will be back. We're going to continue these discussions because, as you can tell, we have a lot to say about them and we have suffered through a lot of them and continue to do so. So go out there and have yourself a great day, a great week, and we will talk to you next time. And we will wrap this one up as well. God, this is definitely like rabbit hole after rabbit. Like this is a total can of worms. There's so many things we can get into this, which is why I wanted to start. And I don't think I even got into like the reality and some of that stuff. We touched on a little bit, but I think this is going to be a recurring theme. I really think this is something that because both of us live it and get burned by it so often. I think this is just one of those things that we're happy to preach on this.
Well, and it's funny too, because what you just saw us do going down this rabbit hole is very quickly what can happen when you get into a bidding war, setting prices, taking on contracts. Is once you get in there, you can get into a rabbit hole of requirements, a rabbit hole of changes that blow up a budget. So these are just some things, just a small section of things for you to consider as you get into this or as you grow your business.
Yeah, these are the things that can like make or break a business too. This is in itself another topic we'll probably cover along the way, is that sometimes you get a customer that is big enough and wants something enough that you're like, cool, I'll do that. This is going to be great. And then you get into it and you realize that no, it's not great. It's like you didn't charge them enough. You're not billing enough for the headache that it is. Or, and sometimes they can handle that. Sometimes it is like somebody's very deep pockets. I was in a project one time that was supposed to be 2 months. 2 years later, they still hadn't gotten all their ducks in a row. They're almost there, but they had tossed out 3 or 4 vendors. They did all this kind of stuff they were doing. They got sold a bill of goods to some extent, but then, they shot themselves in the foot several times as well. I had another customer that was like, they got sold by a company that we can do this. It's simple, piece of cake. All of it's going to work out. It was not, we got 6 weeks into the project and they did not know how to solve the problem they said they were going to solve for basically for free for this customer. And so we had to say, hey, you're lying or whatever it is. Like you can't do this. You just told me you can't do this. They're like, well, we'll convince the customer otherwise. It's like, well, okay. And then sure enough, again, 2 to 3 month project, a year later, I think we finally had it sort of done because we had to go fix the other vendor's problems. These things are out there, and if you're working for yourself and you don't have the ability to if you don't have any wiggle room or if you don't have any buffer, that stuff can sink you because you're suddenly in a situation where you're locked into it with a customer. And I have horror stories. I know of other people have been in a situation where they're their customer is a multi-billion-dollar international organization. And that means they can sue the snot out of you. They can own you. And so you want to be in a situation where you are covered or that you can just keep working, like I said, wow, we could spend multiple, and we will spend multiple episodes talking about this, but we've gone long. So we're going to wrap this one up. We will be back. We're going to continue just chirping away because that's what we do. Again, I'm Rob. He's Mike, and we will talk to you next time.